The crystal stemware was worth more than my first car, but it did not stop Victor Hawthorne from leaning across the table and calling me trash in front of 20 guests. He smiled when he said it, expecting me to crumble or cry into my napkin like a good little charity case. He had no idea that 18 months later, I would buy the controlling stake of his empire and fire him from the very head of the table he was currently using to humiliate me. The ink on the closing documents was still wet when I felt the first true breath of air fill my lungs in 33 years. I sat alone in the conference room of the title company, staring at the heavy cream paper that declared me, Ruby Powell, the sole owner of the penthouse at the Aurelia. It was not just an apartment. It was a glass-walled fortress overlooking the churning gray Atlantic of Morro Bay. It had cost me nearly every cent I had saved over a decade of 70-hour weeks and missed holidays. It was the physical manifestation of my refusal to be dragged back down. The escrow officer, a kind woman with silver hair named Margaret, smiled at me as she slid a heavy brass key across the mahogany table. "Congratulations, Ms. Powell," she said softly. "It is a beautiful property. I hope you will be very happy there." I picked up the key. It was cool and heavy in my palm. I did not want happiness. Happiness was fleeting and often expensive. I wanted silence. I wanted control. I wanted a door that locked and stayed locked until I decided otherwise. "Thank you, Margaret," I said. "It has been a long time coming." I walked out of that office and into the crisp October afternoon. The wind off the water was sharp, smelling of salt and cold rain. But to me, it smelled like victory. I checked my phone. There were no missed calls, no frantic texts asking for money, no guilt trips disguised as family updates. For this 1 hour, I was entirely free. I drove to the building. The Aurelia rose 20 stories above the historic district, a sleek needle of steel and glass that looked out of place among the brick row houses. Which was exactly why I liked it. It was unapologetic. I took the elevator to the top floor, the ride smooth and silent, watching the numbers tick upward. 19, 20. The doors slid open directly into my foyer. The space was empty, echoing, and perfect. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline and the restless ocean beyond. I walked to the center of the living room and just stood there, listening to the lack of noise. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I flinched. It was a reflex I had never quite unlearned. It was Tessa Lang, my only real friend. "My vault," I answered, and her voice was a burst of bright energy against the silence. "Tell me you signed it," she demanded. "Tell me you are standing in your castle right now looking down on the peasants." "I am standing in the castle," I said, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window. "But I am too tired to look down on anyone. I just want to sleep for a week." Tessa laughed. "You can sleep when you are dead. I am coming over with champagne and takeout from that Thai place you like. Do not lock me out." Tessa arrived 40 minutes later with a bottle of Veuve Clicquot and 3 bags of food. We sat on the floor of the empty living room, using a cardboard moving box as a table. The city lights were starting to flicker on below us, a grid of amber and white. Tessa poured the champagne into plastic cups she had brought from her car. "To Ruby Powell," she said, raising her cup. "The only person I know who acts like buying a multi-million-dollar penthouse is a covert military operation." I clinked my cup against hers. "You know why?" I said. "I do," she said, her expression sobering. "But you have to enjoy this. Ruby, you earned it. Nobody gave you a dime." "That is the problem," I said. "If they had given me a dime, they would own $1 of my life. Since they gave me nothing, they think they are owed the whole bank." We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Tessa knew the history. She knew about the time my father, Graham, had guilted me into co-signing a loan for a business idea that evaporated in 3 months, leaving me with the debt collectors. She knew about my mother, Elaine, who viewed my career in logistics management not as a job, but as a resource for the family to mine. And she knew about Bryn, my sister, the golden child with the tin luck. "How are they?" Tessa asked, gesturing vaguely toward the south. Where my family lived in a cluttered house 2 hours away. Do they know? I shook my head. No, I said, and they are not going to know. Not until I have settled in. Maybe not even then. I will tell them I moved. Sure, but I will keep the details vague. A rental. A small place. Nothing that smells like money. Tessa looked around the sprawling living room, at the marble fireplace and the high-tech lighting system. Ruby, she said gently, this place smells like money. It screams it. You cannot hide a penthouse forever. I can hide the address. I said, I can hide the spare key. I have a rule. Tessa, a hard rule. No family favors. No staying over because of a bad breakup. No storing boxes in my spare room. No crashing on the couch for a weekend that turns into a month. This is my sanctuary. If I let them in, even an inch, they will consume it. Tessa nodded. She had watched me rebuild my credit score from the ashes of my 20s. She knew the cost. Cheers to the rule, she said. May it stand for 1,000 years. We finished the champagne. I felt a rare sense of peace settling over me. A belief that perhaps, finally, I had outrun the chaos of my lineage. I should have known better. Chaos does not get tired. It just waits for you to stop running. 2 days later, on the morning I was scheduled to move my furniture in, my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. Elaine Powell never called on Tuesday mornings unless someone was in the hospital or someone needed bail. I took a breath, steeled myself, and answered, Hello, Mom, Ruby! Her voice was high, breathless, and disturbing in its warmth. Oh, honey, I am so glad I caught you. How are you? I am working. I lied, cradling the phone between my ear and shoulder as I taped up the last box of books in my old apartment. What is going on? Is Dad okay? He is fine. Just fine, she said. We were just talking about you this morning over breakfast. We are so proud of you. Ruby, you work so hard. You always have. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Compliments from Elaine were not gifts. They were down payments. Thanks, Mom, I said, my voice guarded. Was there a reason you called? Can't a mother call her daughter? She asked, a playful hurt in her tone. Actually, I did want to ask. We are updating the family address book. Your aunt is sending out holiday cards early this year. I realized I do not have your new address. You said you were moving this week, right? My stomach tightened. I had mentioned, vaguely, months ago, that my lease was up in October. I had not mentioned buying. I had not mentioned the penthouse. I am still in the middle of it. I said, it is chaotic. I will send it to you once I'm settled. Tell Aunt Linda she can just send the card to the old P.O. box for now. It forwards. Oh, stop being so secretive, she laughed. But there was an edge to it, a sharpness. Just text it to me. Ruby, it is for safety. Really. What if something happens to you? We need to know where you are. It is a dangerous world. The logic was flimsy, but the pressure was familiar. It was the heavy, suffocating blanket of maternal concern that smothered boundaries. I have to go. Mom, I said, the movers are here. I will call you later. Wait. Ruby. I hung up. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It was a small interaction, a nothing conversation, but it left a metallic taste in my mouth. She had sounded too alert, too interested. I shook it off. I had work to do. The moving truck I had hired was efficient. By 2 p.m, my furniture was in the freight elevator of the Aurelia. I stood in the lobby, signing the final paperwork with the concierge. A polished young man named David, Ms. Powell, David said, handing me a sleek black fob. This controls access to the garage, the elevator, and the amenities floor. We take security very seriously here. Guests must be announced. Deliveries are held at the desk. Perfect, I said. That is exactly what I want. I turned to head toward the elevators, ready to start the long process of unpacking, ready to claim my space. Then the automatic glass doors at the front of the lobby slid open. The sound of the street spilled in. Horns, sirens, wind, and with it came a voice that froze my blood. "Careful with that bag. Graham, it has her silk blouses in it." I stopped. I did not want to turn around. I wanted to dissolve into the marble floor. I wanted to wake up in my old, cramped apartment and realize this was a stress dream. But I turned. Standing in the center of the pristine, silent lobby of the Aurelia were my parents. Elaine was wearing her heavy wool coat, clutching her purse with both hands, looking around the lobby with wide, hungry eyes. Graham, my father, was wrestling a large, battered suitcase through the door, and behind them, looking bored and scrolling on her phone, was Bryn. My sister was surrounded by 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases and a stack of framed art wrapped in bubble wrap, parked at the curb. Directly behind the Uber they must have arrived in was a rental truck, a U-Haul. I felt the blood drain from my face. I walked toward them, my heels clicking sharply on the stone. The sound made Elaine look up. Her face lit up with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "There she is," she cried, opening her arms as if we were at a family reunion and not an ambush. "Ruby, look at this place. My God, you did not tell us it was a palace." I stopped 5 feet away from them. I did not hug her. I did not smile. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice was low, steady, and cold. Graham set the suitcase down with a heavy thud. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Nice to see you too, Ruby," he grunted. "Maybe give your old man a hand with the rest of this? The doorman wouldn't let us bring the truck into the bay." I looked at the luggage. I looked at the truck outside. I looked at Bryn, who finally looked up from her phone. She offered me a small, tight smile. "Hey, Rubes," she said. "Nice digs. Way better than your last dump?" I looked back at my mother. "I asked you a question. I said, 'What are you doing here? And whose stuff is that?'" Elaine clasped her hands together. She adopted the expression she used for church elders and bank loan officers: pious, pleading, and utterly fake. "Now, Ruby, don't get upset," she began. "We tried to call you back, but you didn't answer. It is a crisis. A total crisis. Poor Bryn. Her lease fell through. Just this morning. Can you believe it?" She paused for effect. I said nothing. Her roommate, that girl with the nose ring. "She bailed," Elaine continued, picking up speed. "Left Bryn high and dry. The landlord kicked them out. Today, Ruby, today, we didn't know what to do. And then I remembered you were moving into this big, beautiful place." She gestured around the lobby, encompassing the crystal chandelier and the velvet seating area. "We just need a spot for her to land," Elaine said. "Just for a couple of weeks, until she gets on her feet. We knew you would want to help. You have so much space now. It is perfect timing. Really, a blessing." I looked at Bryn's luggage, designer bags, framed art. That was not an emergency bag packed in a panic. That was a move. I looked at Graham. He was watching me closely, his eyes assessing my reaction, calculating the leverage. "And how did you find the address?" I asked. "I never gave it to you." Graham shrugged. "It is public record. Ruby, you bought the place, didn't you? Property tax records are online. I just did a little search. Wanted to surprise you." A search. He had been tracking me. He had been waiting for the deed to record so he could find me. "And the rental truck?" I pointed through the glass. "You rented a truck for a crisis that happened this morning?" "We had to get her furniture somewhere," Graham said, his voice hardening slightly. "Look, are we going to stand here debating logistics, or are you going to let your sister up? She has had a traumatic day." The lobby was quiet. David, the concierge, was watching from the desk, his hand hovering near the phone, unsure if this was a family reunion or a security incident. It was a security incident. I took a step back. I felt a trembling in my hands, not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt like it would burn my throat. This was the pattern. This was the trap. If I let Bryn in for a night, she would be there for a year. If I let her in, my sanctuary would become their colony. "No," I said. The word hung in the air. Simple, flat. Elaine blinked. "What?" "No," I repeated. "Bryn is not moving in. Not for a couple of weeks. Not for a night. Graham's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Excuse me?" he snapped. "This is your sister, Ruby. She has nowhere to go. There is a Marriott 3 blocks over." I said, "I will pay for 3 nights. That gives her plenty of time to find a sublet or a storage unit. But she is not staying here." Bryn dropped her phone. Her bored mask slipped, revealing the petulance underneath. "Mom," she whined, "you said she would say yes. You said it was arranged." Elaine shushed her quickly, turning back to me with desperation. "Ruby, be reasonable. Look at all this stuff. We can't haul it to a hotel. We already reserved the freight elevator for 4 o'clock. The world stopped." "You what?" I asked. Graham looked away, feigning interest in a potted plant. "I called ahead," he muttered. "Spoke to the management office. Told them I was your father handling the move-in. They put us on the schedule." I stared at him. The violation was so complete, so arrogant. It was almost breathtaking. He had impersonated me or authorized himself to manage my property before I had even slept there. "You reserved my elevator," I said, my voice rising slightly. "You looked up my address. You rented a truck. You packed her life up. This wasn't an emergency. Mom, this was a plan. You planned to ambush me." Elaine's face crumbled. She dabbled at dry eyes. "How can you be so cruel?" she sobbed. "After everything we have done for you? You have this mansion, and you would let your sister sleep on the street?" "She is not sleeping on the street." I said, "She is going to a hotel, or she is going home with you. But that truck is not unloading here." I turned to David at the desk. "David," I said clearly, "these people are not my guests. They are not authorized to go up. Please cancel the 4 o'clock freight reservation." David nodded, his face professional and impassive. "Of course, Ms. Powell." Graham stepped forward. He was a big man, and he used his size to intimidate. He loomed over me, his voice dropping to a growl. "You are making a mistake. Ruby, you think you are too good for us now? You think this money makes you special? You are trash, just like the rest of us. You turn your back on family, and you will end up with nothing." I looked him in the eye. I had feared this man for 30 years. I had feared his anger, his disappointment, his loud voice. But standing in the lobby of the building I owned, with the deed signed in ink, I felt something shift. "I am not turning my back," I said. "I am closing a door. There is a difference." I pulled out my credit card and handed it to Bryn. "Go to the Marriott," I said. 3 nights. That is the offer. Take it or leave it." Bryn looked at the card, then at Graham. Graham snatched the card from my hand. "Fine," he spat. "We will take the charity. But don't expect us to call you for Thanksgiving." He grabbed the handle of the battered suitcase and began dragging it back toward the door. Elaine gave me one last look, a look of pure, distilled venom, before following him. Bryn trailed behind, looking at her Louis Vuitton bags, as if wondering how she would get them to the curb. I watched them go. I watched them load the bags into the Uber. I watched the U-Haul pull away. Only then did I exhale. I went upstairs. I unpacked 3 boxes. I sat on my new sofa and watched the sun set over the ocean. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean by the confrontation, but I also felt secure. I had held the line. At 8 o'clock, my phone rang. I assumed it was them, calling to scream at me from the hotel room, but it was a local number, the building management office. "Hello? Ms. Powell? It is Milo Granger, the property manager. I apologize for disturbing you so late." "It is fine." "Milo, what is it?" "I just wanted to verify a request we received." He sounded puzzled. "A gentleman came by the office about 20 minutes ago, said he was your father. He had your full name, your unit number, and he claimed you sent him to pick up a spare fob for the apartment. He said he was an authorized resident." My hand gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Graham had not gone to the hotel. He had circled back. I did not send him. I said, "I am the only resident. There are no other authorized users." I thought as much. Milo said, he was quite insistent. He knew the protocol for family access. He actually cited the bylaws about immediate family privileges. I refused him, obviously, but he caused a bit of a scene. He read the bylaws? I asked. Yes. Milo said. Actually, that is the other thing. We had a digital inquiry earlier today from an email address claiming to be you, asking for a copy of the full Homeowners Association governing documents. My assistant sent the welcome packet out automatically. Did you receive that? I checked my email on my laptop. There was nothing in my inbox. I checked my spam folder. There it was. A forwarded email. The original sender was the building management. The recipient was an email address I did not recognize. ruby.powell.official@gmail.com. A fake account, and it had been forwarded to my actual email address. A mistake? A taunt? I opened the attachment. It was the 300-page PDF of the building rules, but someone had modified it. Certain pages were highlighted in yellow. Page 14. Guest limitations and family exceptions. Page 42. Subletting restrictions. Page 88. Unit access for emergency contacts. There were notes in the margins. Digital sticky notes. Loophole here. Medical necessity. Clause 4. If she is away for 7 days, family can enter. I stared at the screen. The chill from the ocean seemed to seep through the glass. This was not just about a free room for Bryn. This was not just a lazy attempt to mooch. Graham and Elaine had researched the building. They had created a fake identity to get the legal documents. They were studying the contracts of my home, looking for a legal or technical way to force the door open. They were not trying to visit. They were trying to invade. I closed the laptop. I walked to the front door of my apartment and engaged the deadbolt. Then I engaged the secondary privacy lock. I went back to the phone. Milo. I said, I need to make some changes to my contact preferences. Immediately, of course. Ms. Powell. No verbal authorizations. I said, for anything. Not for packages. Not for guests. Not for maintenance. If it is not in writing, signed by me in person, the answer is no. And if that man returns, I want you to call the police. Understood. Milo said. I hung up. I looked around my beautiful, empty penthouse. The shadows were stretching long across the floor. It was still a fortress, but the enemy was not just at the gates. They were studying the blueprints. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. Somewhere out there, in a hotel room I was paying for, my father was reading a PDF on his phone, looking for Clause 4. I poured myself another glass of the warm champagne left on the box. Welcome home. Ruby, I whispered to myself, the war has started. I treated the Hawthorne family not as a collection of relatives, but as a corporate restructuring project. In my former life as an operations manager, I fixed broken companies. I found the leaks in the supply chain, the redundancies in the payroll, and the quiet, structural rot that could bring down a 10-year-old firm in a single quarter. I knew that power was rarely where people said it was. It was never in the press release or the loud speech at the head of the table. Power lived in the footnotes of the quarterly filings. It lived in the vendor lists and the silent partners and the debt covenants. So, for 3 weeks, I did not argue with Ethan. I did not call Victor. I did not complain to my friends. I built a map. I converted the guest bedroom into a war room. Though I kept the door locked and called it my home office, I bought a whiteboard, but I did not use it for dramatic strings and photos like a detective in a movie. I used it to draw organizational charts. I started with the public face. Hawthorne Global. It was a massive entity, a conglomerate with fingers in logistics, commercial real estate, and heavy manufacturing. Everyone knew Hawthorne Global. It was the brand on the skyscrapers and the logo on the charity checks. But beneath that was the shadow ecosystem. I spent my nights trawling through public records, state and corporation filings, and uniform commercial code statements. I found the charitable foundations, the Hawthorne Family Trust, the preservation societies, and the shell companies used to hold real estate assets. I mapped out the board members for each entity. It was a tangled web of reciprocity. The same 12 names appeared over and over again. A retired senator, a quiet investment banker, the dean of a prestigious business school. They sat on Victor's boards, and he sat on theirs. They approved his compensation packages, and he donated to their capital campaigns. It was a closed loop of favor and influence, designed to look like governance while functioning like a monarchy. I was looking for the weak link. I was looking for the person who was not smiling in the photographs. I found my first lead on a Tuesday night. At the masquerade gala for the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It was one of the mandatory events on the Hawthorne calendar. Attendance was not optional. It was a tithe paid to the god of public reputation. I had bought a dress for the occasion, a sleek, architectural black gown that looked nothing like the soft, floral things Victor liked his daughter-in-law to wear. It was armor. Ethan was supposed to drive me. At 5 o'clock. He called. "I can't make it," he said. His voice sounded tight, compressed by stress. "What happened?" I asked, putting my earring in. "My father," he said. "He sent me to the distribution center in Newark. There is a union issue. He said I have to handle it personally. Tonight, I stopped. The distribution center in Newark ran 24 hours a day. Union negotiations were handled by the legal team, not by the son of the owner on the night of the biggest gala of the season. He is doing this on purpose." "Ethan," I said calmly, "he wants me to walk into that ballroom alone. He wants to see if I will fold when I don't have you to hide behind." "I know," Ethan said, and I could hear the misery in his voice. "I know, Naomi, but if I don't go, he will say I am not committed to the company. He will use it. Please, just make an appearance. I will come as soon as I can." I hung up the phone. I looked at myself in the mirror. I applied a layer of dark red lipstick. I would not just make an appearance, I would make an audit. The ballroom at the Pierre Hotel was a sea of silk, diamonds, and black tuxedos. The air smelled of expensive lilies and old money. I walked in with my head high, holding a flute of champagne I had no intention of drinking. I saw them almost immediately. The Hawthorne table was front and center, a gravitational well that pulled in every sycophant in the room. Victor was holding court, laughing loudly at something a senator was saying. He looked golden, benevolent, and untouchable. When he saw me approaching, his smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "Naomi," he boomed, pitching his voice so the surrounding tables could hear. "Flying solo tonight? Where is that husband of yours? Working late again? I worry about that boy. He works too hard." The gaslighting was elegant. He had sent Ethan away, and now he was playing the concerned father. "He is handling the Newark issue." "Victor," I said, my voice pleasant and level. "The one you assigned him at 5 o'clock. Victor chuckled, waving a hand dismissively. "Business never sleeps, my dear. But look at you. You look distinct, very modern." He turned back to the senator, effectively dismissing me. I was a temporary accessory, a nuisance to be tolerated until the divorce he was undoubtedly planning. I took my seat at the far end of the table, next to a cousin I had never met who spent the entire dinner texting under the napkin. I did not try to engage Victor. Instead, I watched the room. I watched who approached Victor and who avoided him. Most people approached. They came to kiss the ring. They laughed too hard at his jokes. They touched his shoulder with familiar reverence. But there were exceptions. I watched Leonard Price, the chief financial officer of Hawthorne Global. Leonard had been with Victor for 30 years. He was a small, nervous man with spectacles that constantly slid down his nose. In every annual report, Leonard was praised as the rock of the company, the conservative steward of the Hawthorne fortune. Tonight, Leonard looked like a man walking the plank. He sat 3 seats away from Victor, and he never looked at him. He drank scotch, neat, and his hand trembled slightly every time he set the glass down. When Victor raised a toast to the charity, Leonard did not stand up immediately. He hesitated, looking at his plate, before dragging himself to his feet. Fear, it was radiating off him. I filed that away. Leonard Price was afraid. Why? The company had just posted record profits. The stock was up. A CFO in his position should have been taking a victory lap. I needed air. The suffocation of the hawthorn table was getting to me. I slipped away toward the bar in the back of the room, seeking a moment of anonymity. I ordered a club soda with lime. He is going to crash. You know. I turned. A woman was standing next to me, leaning against the bar with a practiced, predatory elegance. She was about my age, with sharp features and hair cut into a severe, stylish bob. She wore a tuxedo jacket instead of a gown. "Excuse me?" I asked. The bartender handed her a martini. She took a sip and nodded toward the front of the room, where Victor was now holding a microphone, making a pledge of $100,000. "Victor," she said, "he's flying too high. The air is thin up there." I looked at her. Her face was familiar. I had seen her on a panel about emerging markets 2 years ago. Sloan Mercer. I said, "You are with Vanguard Capital." She smiled. A quick, sharp expression. "I was," she corrected. "I left 6 months ago. Now I run my own fund. And you are Naomi Patterson, the consultant who married into the monarchy. I am Naomi Hawthorne now." I said automatically. Sloan raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" She looked at me with a strange mix of pity and respect. "You don't look like a Hawthorne. You look like you are doing math in your head." "I am just watching the room," I said. Sloan swirled her olive. "I worked on the Hawthorne account when I was a junior analyst," she said quietly. "Before I moved to the buy side, I spent 3 weeks in their data room during a failed merger. I saw things." "What kind of things?" I asked. Sloan turned to face me fully. Her eyes were serious. "Victor has a talent for moving money around," she said. "He treats liquidity like a magic trick. Now you see it. Now you don't. I left that account because I didn't want my signature on the due diligence." She took a card from her pocket and slid it across the bar to me. "I heard about the dinner," she said. "The trash comment. News travels fast in this town." My face heated up. "It does." I said, "Listen to me." "Naomi," Sloan said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "he is liquid until he isn't. Remember that." She finished her drink in one swallow, tapped the bar twice, and walked away before I could ask her another question. I looked at the card. Sloan Mercer, managing partner, Mercer Vane Capital. He is liquid until he isn't. I left the gala 10 minutes later. I did not say goodbye to Victor. When I got home, the house was dark. Ethan's car was in the driveway. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the island in the dark, staring at a glass of water. He was still in his suit, his tie undone, looking exhausted and defeated. "Ethan?" I said softly, turning on the under-cabinet lights. He flinched. "Hey," he croaked. "How was it?" "It was exactly what you think it was," I said. I sat down next to him. "What happened in Newark?" "Nothing," he said. He rubbed his face with his hands. "There was no union issue. I got there, and the shift manager looked at me like I was crazy. He said everything was fine. It was a wild goose chase." I felt a surge of anger. Not at Ethan, but for him. "He just wanted you out of the room," I said. "He wanted to isolate me." "It is not just that," Ethan said. He slid a piece of paper across the counter toward me. I picked it up. It was a legal document, a proxy voting agreement. "He gave this to me yesterday," Ethan said. "He told me that if I don't sign it by Friday, he is going to suspend my distribution from the family trust. He says the market is volatile and he needs to consolidate voting power to protect the company." I read the document. It was irrevocable for 5 years. It assigned all of Ethan's voting rights tied to shares left to him by his grandmother, directly to Victor. "Ethan," I said, looking up, "this isn't about market volatility. This is about total control. If you sign this, you have no voice in the company. You are just a passenger." "I know," Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. The sudden noise made me jump. "I am sorry," he whispered immediately. "I am sorry. Naomi, I don't have a choice. The trust pays for the mortgage. It pays for the maintenance on this house. It pays for everything. If he cuts me off, we can't sustain this life. We don't need this life," I said firmly. "We can sell the house. I can work. You can work somewhere else." He looked at me with sad, hollow eyes. "You don't understand," he said. "You can't just leave Hawthorne Global. He will blacklist me. He will ensure I never work in this industry again. I have seen him do it." I reached out and took his hand. It was cold. "Ethan," I said, "we need help. Not financial help. We need to talk to someone. Together." He pulled his hand away. "No shrinks," he said. "Victor says therapy is for people who can't handle reality. Victor is a narcissist who calls his daughter-in-law trash." I said, "Why are we taking mental health advice from him?" Ethan stared at the proxy form. "We have to keep it secret," he said finally. "If he finds out I am seeing a therapist, he will use it. He will say I am unstable. He will try to remove me from the board on medical grounds." "Fine," I said. "We will pay cash. We will use fake names. We will drive to the next county. But we are going. Because if you sign this paper, Ethan, you are signing away your spine." 2 days later, we sat on a beige couch in the office of Dr. Eris Thorne, a quiet man with kind eyes who operated out of a converted carriage house in a town 40 miles away. I listened as Ethan spoke. For the first 20 minutes, he defended his father. He talked about Victor's brilliance, his burden, the stress of running an empire. Dr. Thorne just listened. Then he asked one question. "Ethan, what happened when you made a mistake as a child?" Ethan went silent. The silence stretched for a long, painful minute. He didn't yell. Ethan said, his voice small. He would just stop. He would stop looking at me. He would stop speaking to me, sometimes for days. I would sit at the dinner table, and he would ask the maid for the salt. But he wouldn't hear me if I asked for the butter. I ceased to exist. I felt my heart break. I looked at my husband, a grown man, a vice president of a major corporation, and saw the terrified boy he was inside. I had to be perfect to be visible. Ethan said, if I was perfect, if I did exactly what he said, the lights came back on. He would smile. He would love me again. I reached over and held his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. His silence at the dinner when Victor insulted me wasn't a betrayal. It was a survival reflex. He had been trained like a dog to freeze when the master raised his voice. We left the session drained. Ethan didn't say much on the drive home, but he didn't sign the proxy form that night. He put it in a drawer. It was a start. While Ethan fought his internal battle, I continued the external one. Sloane's words kept echoing in my mind. He is liquid until he isn't. I went back to the maps. I looked closer at the cash flow statements. Hawthorne Global was a machine that generated revenue, but where was it going? I started looking at the vendor list for the headquarters. I found the usual suspects: security firms, catering companies, IT maintenance, and then I found Marrowgate Holdings. It was listed as a strategic consulting partner. Hawthorne Global paid Marrowgate Holdings a monthly retainer of $250,000, $3 million a year. I looked up Marrowgate. It was an LLC registered in Delaware, using a registered agent service to hide the ownership. But mistakes happen. People get lazy. I dug into the older filings, going back 5 years. In the original incorporation documents, before the registered agent took over, there was a signature on the organizer line. Randall Crowe. I knew that name. Randall Crowe was Victor's brother-in-law. He was the younger brother of Ethan's late mother. I had met Randall once at a barbecue. He was a man who wore gold chains and talked loudly about investments that never seemed to pan out. He had no degree, no consulting experience, and no expertise in logistics or manufacturing. So why was Victor paying him $3 million a year? I printed the documents. I lined them up on the floor of my war room. This wasn't consulting. This was a siphon. Victor was moving money out of the public company and into a private pocket. Why? Was he paying Randall off? Was it a tax dodge? Or was Randall just the bagman for something else? I sat back on my heels, looking at the papers. The moral weight of what I was doing settled on my shoulders. I could take this to the press. I could leak it to a business journalist. It would cause a scandal. It might hurt the stock price. It would certainly embarrass Victor, but that was just revenge. If I burned the house down, Ethan would burn with it. The employees, thousands of them who worked in the warehouses and factories, would suffer. I didn't want to destroy Hawthorne Global. I wanted to excise the tumor that was killing it. I wanted safety. I wanted dignity. I wanted a marriage that belonged to me, not to a billionaire who used shame as currency. My phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up. It was a text message from a blocked number. The same sender as before. Clause 14 lets him claim you harmed the family. If you sign, he can take everything you own and sue you for future damages. It is a suicide pact. I stared at the screen. Then a second message popped up. Tuesday, 7:30 in the evening. Hawthorne Aero Park. Conference Room B in the hangar. Come alone. My pulse kicked up. The Aero Park was the private airfield where the corporate jets were kept. It was isolated. It was secure. It was dangerous. But I had to know. I drove to the airfield on Tuesday night. I told Ethan I was meeting a client for dinner. The lie tasted sour, but necessary. The Aero Park was quiet. The hangars loomed like metal beasts against the dark sky. I parked my car in the visitor lot and walked to the main office building attached to Hangar 1. The security guard at the desk looked up, checked a list, and nodded at me. You are expected. Ms. Patterson, Conference Room B, down the hall to the left. I walked down the corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum. I pushed open the door to Room B. A woman was sitting at the small round table. She had graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and wore a sensible cardigan. She looked like a librarian or a school principal. It was Marianne Voss. I knew her face from the company newsletter. She had been Victor's executive assistant for 20 years. She was the gatekeeper, the vault, and then, 6 months ago, she had quietly retired. Marianne, I said, closing the door behind me. Sit down. Naomi, she said. Her voice was dry and clipped. I sat. Why are you helping me? I asked. Marianne placed a manicured hand on a thick manila folder in front of her. Because he fired me, she said. He didn't say I was fired. He said I was retiring to spend time with my grandchildren. He gave me a watch and a cake, but he fired me because I told him he couldn't use the pension fund as collateral for a personal loan. She pushed the folder across the table. I am not a vindictive woman. Naomi, I signed an NDA. I cannot tell you what he did, but I can show you what he does. I opened the folder. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a map of the gun. It contained meeting agendas going back 3 years. It contained lists of vendors. It contained travel logs. Look at the board meetings, Marianne said. Look at the dates. I scanned the pages. Every time there is a vote on executive compensation, she said, pointing a finger at the paper. Look who flies in on the private jet 2 days before. I looked. Gideon Hale, the head of the compensation committee. He flies them in, Marianne said. He wines them. He dines them at the estate. He gives them gifts that don't appear on the disclosure forms. Vintage wine, art, promises of board seats for their children. By the time the meeting happens, the vote is already decided. She flipped to another page. And look at this. It was a list of charitable donations from the Hawthorne Foundation. He uses the foundation to buy silence, she said. If a regulator starts asking questions, suddenly that regulator's favorite charity gets a $50,000 check. It is all legal. It is all above board, but it is bribery. I looked up at her. Why give this to me? Why now? Because you are the first one who didn't cry, she said. I blinked. I was there at the dinner. Marianne said, I was in the kitchen, coordinating the service. I heard what he called you. I heard what he offered you. Every other wife, every other son. They fold. They take the money or they take the abuse. You walked out. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Victor thinks everyone has a price. He thinks people are just assets to be acquired or liabilities to be liquidated. He doesn't understand principle. That is his blind spot. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. This folder contains nothing confidential. These are old agendas and public lists. But if you overlay them with the financials you are already looking at, and I know you are looking, Naomi, You are an operations woman. You will see the pattern. She walked to the door. One last thing. She said, Clause 14. I looked at her. The morality clause. She said, he defines harm to the family as anything that embarrasses him. If you sign that optics agreement, you can't divorce Ethan without losing every penny you have earned. You can't write a book. You can't give an interview. You can't even tweet. He will own your voice. She opened the door. Don't let him own you. Naomi. He already owns his son. He doesn't need another pet. She walked out. I sat alone in the cold conference room, the folder open in front of me. I looked at the columns of dates and names. I looked at the machinery of influence. Marianne was right. I couldn't win this by arguing with Victor. I couldn't win by appealing to his better nature, because he didn't have one. I couldn't win by asking Ethan to stand up to him, because Ethan was still on his knees. I had to stop thinking like a daughter-in-law. I had to stop thinking like a victim. I looked at the agendas. I looked at the proxy votes. I looked at the structure of the board. Victor ruled through fear and money, but he ruled by consent. The board consented. The shareholders consented. They consented because they thought he was invincible. They consented because the dividends were good and the boat wasn't rocking. I needed to rock the boat. I closed the folder. I stood up. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to throw a drink in his face. I needed to buy a ticket to the show. I needed voting power. I needed to speak the only language Victor Hawthorne respected. Control. I walked out of the hangar and into the night air. The wind was picking up, rattling the metal siding of the buildings. It was a cold, hard sound. I got into my car and started the engine. I didn't drive home immediately. I drove to the edge of the airfield and watched a jet take off. Its lights blinking against the darkness as it climbed higher and higher, burning fuel, burning money, carrying someone important to somewhere expensive. He is liquid until he isn't. I put the car in gear. I was done mapping the ecosystem. It was time to introduce a new species to the environment. A predator, freedom. I discovered, had a specific price tag. It was not a poetic concept or a state of mind. It was a monthly burn rate. If I wanted to fight Victor Hawthorne, I could not do it on a debit card linked to a joint account he could freeze with a single phone call to his private banker. I needed war chests. I revived Patterson Operations, LLC. It was a dormant entity I had formed 5 years ago. A dusty shell company I had abandoned when I married Ethan and convinced myself that being a wife was a full-time career. I filed the reinstatement paperwork with the state, paid the $200 fee, and opened a business checking account at a credit union that had never heard of the Hawthorne family. I did not go after the glamorous contracts. I did not try to consult for the tech darlings or the fashion houses. I went to the rust. I reached out to my old network in logistics and heavy manufacturing, the unsexy, gritty industries where margins were thin and efficiency was God. Within 2 weeks, I had a contract. A mid-sized auto parts manufacturer in Ohio was bleeding cash through a chaotic supply chain. They did not care who my father-in-law was. They cared that I could cut their freight costs by 15% in 90 days. I flew to Ohio on a commercial flight. Economy class. I walked the floor of a factory that smelled of ozone and hot metal. I wore steel-toed boots and a hard hat. I argued with shift managers who thought I was just a girl with a spreadsheet. I worked 16 hours a day for 4 days straight, mapping their inventory flow, identifying the bottlenecks, and renegotiating their carrier contracts. When I flew back to the estate, I was exhausted, smelling of stale airport coffee, and I had never felt better. I invoiced them for $12,000. It was a drop in the bucket compared to Victor's billions, but it was mine. It was money that did not come with a side order of humiliation. I put every cent into the credit union account. I called it the Freedom Fund. But money was only one shield. I needed another. I created a document on an encrypted cloud server. I titled it simply, The Risk Memo. I treated my life like a compliance audit. Every time Victor spoke to me, I logged it. Every time he made a veiled threat to Ethan, I logged it. October 14th. Victor called Ethan at 11 at night, demanded to know why Ethan had not attended the optional golf retreat, implied that Ethan's position on the board was contingent on visibility. October 17th. Victor's personal attorney sent a revised draft of the optics agreement to my personal email. Despite my lawyer telling them to stop, the email subject line was, "For the good of the family, I was building a data set. If Victor ever tried to paint me as the unstable intruder, I would have a chronological time-stamped map of his coercion." It was tedious work, documenting the subtle cuts of psychological warfare, but I knew from my time in operations that data always won the argument. We were due for a mandatory appearance. It was unavoidable. It was Victor's 65th birthday brunch, a small family gathering of 80 people at the main estate. Ethan was a wreck while we were getting dressed. He changed his tie 3 times. He kept checking his phone. "We have a plan." I reminded him, standing in the doorway of his closet. "We arrive at 11. We say hello to your aunts. We give Victor his gift. We eat 1 plate of food. We leave at 12:30. We sign nothing. We agree to nothing." Ethan nodded, his hands shaking as he adjusted his cufflinks. "He is going to ask about the proxy vote," Ethan said. "He is going to corner me." Then you say, "I am still reviewing it with counsel." I said, "You become a broken record. You don't say no. You don't say yes. You say you are reviewing." Bureaucracy is the only thing that bores him enough to make him walk away. We drove to the estate. The driveway was lined with Bentleys and Range Rovers. The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. Victor was holding court on the terrace, wearing a linen suit that probably cost more than my first car. When he saw us, he didn't scowl. He beamed. He opened his arms wide, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch to the hilt. "Ethan, Naomi," he shouted, "you made it. I was worried you were too busy with your little projects to join us." He kissed my cheek. His cologne was expensive and overpowering. "Happy birthday." "Victor," I said, handing him a gift bag containing a rare bottle of scotch. He took it without looking at it. "I wanted to clear the air," he said, his voice dropping so only Ethan and I could hear. "About the dinner, I fear you took my comments too seriously. Naomi, it was a roast. You know? A bit of fun. We have a dark sense of humor in this family. I apologize if you didn't get the joke. It was a masterclass in non-apology." He hadn't said he was sorry for calling me trash. He had said he was sorry I was too stupid to understand his wit. I smiled. It was a sharp, bright smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I understand perfectly. Victor," I said, "we are all just adjusting to the new dynamic." "New dynamic?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I am working again," I said casually. "My consulting firm. I just picked up a turnaround contract for a supplier in the Midwest. It is fascinating work. I saw a flicker of interest. Victor respected commerce. He despised idleness, but he respected the hustle. Even if he thought mine was beneath him. "Who is the client?" he asked. "I cannot say," I said smoothly. "NDAs. You know, but they compete with one of your subsidiaries in the aerospace sector. I am helping them lean out their supply chain to undercut the market leader." Victor stiffened. He didn't like that. He didn't like the idea of me. The trash, sharpening a knife that might cut him, even indirectly. "Be careful." "Naomi," he said, his smile tightening. "The aerospace sector is a small world. You don't want to step on toes. I just focus on the efficiency." "Victor," I said, "business is business." I took Ethan's arm and led him away toward the buffet. I could feel Victor's eyes on my back. I had changed the equation. I wasn't just a sullen daughter-in-law anymore. I was a player in the game, however small. We left at 12:30, exactly as planned. Ethan breathed for the first time in 90 minutes as we cleared the main gate. The following Tuesday, I met Marianne Voss again. We did not meet at the airfield this time. We met at a diner 20 miles out of town, a place with sticky laminated menus and no chance of running into a Hawthorne associate. She slid into the booth opposite me. She looked tired. "He is moving fast." she said without preamble. What is it? I asked. Project Chimera. She said, it is the acquisition he has been planning for a year. He wants to buy Kimball Logistics. It is a massive competitor, if he pulls it off. Hawthorne Global becomes the monopoly player on the East Coast. The stock will double. He will be untouchable. So let him buy it. I said, I'm not trying to stop him from making money. You don't understand. Marianne said, to finance the deal? He needs a new line of credit from the banking syndicate. $4 billion. The banks are skittish right now because of interest rates. They have imposed strict debt covenants. Explain. I said, the covenants require the company to maintain a pristine reputation score and a specific debt-to-equity ratio. Marianne said, but more importantly, there is a material adverse change clause. If there is any scandal, any investigation, any governance issue that threatens the stability of the leadership, the banks can pull the financing. She leaned in. He is walking a tightrope. Naomi, he needs to look perfect for the next 60 days. If the board wobbles, if there is a whiff of internal war, the banks will spook. The deal collapses. And if the deal collapses, he owes $100 million in break fees. It would cripple his liquidity. I stirred my coffee. This was the leverage. Victor wasn't just a bully. He was a gambler who had pushed all his chips into the center of the table. He is vulnerable. I said, he is terrified. Marianne corrected. That is why he is pressuring Ethan to sign the proxy. He needs to show the banks that the family voting bloc is 100% unified. He cannot afford a rogue vote. I went home and stared at my whiteboard. I had the why. Now I needed the how. I needed to talk to someone who understood the board dynamics better than I did. I called Sloan Mercer. 2 days later, Sloan sent me a calendar invite for coffee at a private social club in the city, a place so old and dusty it felt like a museum. I walked into the library room. Sloan was sitting in a leather armchair next to an elderly man. He had white hair, a cane, and the sharpest blue eyes I had ever seen. Naomi. Sloan said, this is Gideon Hale. I knew the name. Gideon Hale was a legend in the industry. He had served on the Hawthorne board for 12 years before retiring abruptly last year, due to health issues. Mr. Hale, I said, extending my hand. It is an honor. Please, call me Gideon, he said. His voice was raspy but strong. Sloan tells me you are causing trouble. I am trying to survive trouble. I said. Gideon gestured for me to sit. I knew your husband when he was a boy. Gideon said. He was a sweet kid. Too sensitive for that house. Victor used to eat him alive at the dinner table just for sport. I nodded. He still does. Gideon sighed. He tapped his cane on the Persian rug. I didn't leave because of my health. Naomi, my heart is fine. I left because Victor wanted to move the pension liabilities off the main balance sheet and into a shell company. It was legal, technically, but it was wrong. It put 3,000 retirees at risk. I refused to sign off on it as the audit chair. What happened? I asked. He dug up a mistake I made in 1985. Gideon said, a bad investment I made that looked like a conflict of interest if you squinted hard enough. He told me I could resign with dignity and a glowing press release, or he would leak the story to the Journal and ruin my reputation. He blackmailed you. I said, Gideon smiled grimly, that is a harsh word. He calls it leverage. I resigned. I signed the NDA, and I have regretted it every day since. He leaned forward. You cannot fight him with anger. Naomi, he feeds on anger. He loves a screaming match because he can always scream louder. He has the microphone. So how do I fight him? I asked. Sunlight. Gideon said, Victor is a creature of the dark. He operates in the gray areas of bylaws and trust indentures. He relies on people being too polite or too scared to read the fine print. You have to drag him into the light. You have to make the private public. He paused. And you need votes. You cannot do this alone. You need a coalition. I don't have shares. I said, Ethan's shares are locked in the trust. Victor controls the trustee. Are you sure? Gideon asked. I blinked. What do you mean? Ethan's mother. Gideon said, Catherine. She was a smart woman. She knew what Victor was. before she died. She set up a separate entity, a legacy holding. It wasn't part of the main marital estate. I have never heard of this. I said, Victor made sure of that. Gideon said, but I was on the board when it happened. Catherine insisted that a block of Class B preferred shares be held in that entity for Ethan. They are non-voting shares mostly, but, I prompted. But there is a conversion clause, Gideon said. If the holder files a specific notice with the corporate secretary, a notice of active intent, those preferred shares convert to voting common stock. It was her way of giving Ethan an escape hatch. Does Ethan know? I asked. Gideon shook his head. I doubt it. Victor likely told him it was just a tax vehicle. He probably signs the annual maintenance paperwork without reading it. I felt a chill go down my spine. Ethan had a weapon in his pocket, and he had been using it as a handkerchief for 10 years. Thank you. Gideon, I said, one warning. Gideon said as I stood up, if you pull that trigger, if you activate those shares, Victor will go nuclear. He will not see it as a business move. He will see it as patricide. I went home and waited for Ethan. When he walked in, looking gray and defeated from another day at the office, I poured him a drink. Ethan, I said, we need to talk about your mother. He looked surprised. My mother? Why? I sat him down. I told him what Gideon had said. I didn't frame it as an attack on Victor. I framed it as a mystery. Ethan, if this is true, you own something you don't understand. You are signing documents you haven't read. He rubbed his temples. Naomi, please, I can't handle more complexity. Victor handles the trust. It is fine. It is not fine, I said gently. It is infantilizing. You are 34 years old. You are a vice president. Do you want to be a ward of your father forever? I don't want a war, he whispered. I am not asking for a war. I said, I am asking for an education. Just one meeting, not with the family lawyer, with an independent fiduciary, someone who works for you. He resisted. He argued. He paced the living room, but deep down, the curiosity and the resentment was growing. Fine, he said finally. One meeting. But if this blows up, Naomi, it won't blow up. I lied. We are just asking questions. I found a fiduciary advisor in the city, a woman named Elena Rostova who specialized in high-net-worth disentanglement. Her office was glass and steel, cold and precise. Ethan sat in the chair like a truant schoolboy. I sat next to him. Elena placed a stack of documents on the desk. I have reviewed the public filings and the probate records from your mother's estate, she said. Mr. Hale was correct. She opened a folder. There is an entity called the Catherine H. Legacy Fund. It holds 4% of Hawthorne Global in Class B preferred stock, currently. These shares have no voting rights, however. She pointed to a paragraph on page 40, clause 7.2. The beneficiary may, at any time, convert these shares to Class A common voting stock by filing a notice of active intent with the board secretary. Ethan stared at the paper. 4%? He asked. That doesn't sound like much, Elena said. But in a closely held company where the float is small, 4% is massive. It is a swing vote. If you convert these shares, Mr. Hawthorne, you become the second largest individual voting shareholder after your father. Ethan looked pale. Why didn't he tell me? He asked. Because right now, Elena said, those shares are silent. As long as they are Class B, they are just money. Victor doesn't mind you having money. He minds you having power. She pushed a single sheet of paper across the desk. This is the notice of active intent. It is a standard form. You sign it, we notarize it, and we courier it to the corporate secretary. 48 hours later, you have a seat at the table, a real seat. Ethan looked at the pen. He looked at me. If I sign this, he said, his voice trembling, he will cut me off. He will fire me. He can't fire you easily, Elena said. Not if you are a major voting shareholder. You would have rights. You could sue for oppression. I don't want to sue my father, Ethan cried. Then don't, I said softly. Don't sign it today. Just take it home. Just know that it is there. Know that you are not powerless." Ethan took the paper. He folded it carefully and put it in his inside jacket pocket. He didn't sign it, but he didn't throw it away. We drove home in silence. I could feel the energy shifting. The dynamic of the universe had changed. Ethan wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a sleeping giant. But I couldn't wait for Ethan to wake up. I needed to build the coalition Gideon had talked about. I started moving quietly. I used the research I had done on the board members and the institutional investors. I reached out to the small pension funds that held Hawthorne's stock. I reached out to the independent directors who had been marginalized by Victor. I didn't storm into their offices screaming about justice. I invited them for coffee. I positioned myself as a concerned stakeholder. I talked about risk. I have noticed. I would say to a junior portfolio manager at a state pension fund that the governance structure at Hawthorne is heavily weighted toward one individual. With the upcoming acquisition, don't you worry about keyman risk? What happens if Victor has a health event? There is no succession plan. I spoke their language. I spoke about fiduciary duty and sustainability and succession planning. I planted seeds of doubt. I wasn't asking them to fire Victor. I was asking them to consider if Victor was a safe bet for the next 10 years. Slowly, quietly, I began to see heads nod. I am not the only one concerned. A director of a teachers' union fund told me over tea, "We have been worried about the debt covenants for months, but no one wants to be the first to speak up. Victor can be vindictive. We need a coalition." I said, "A group of shareholders who simply ask for a governance review. Just a review. It is standard practice." I was building a web. It was delicate. One wrong move, one leaked conversation, and Victor would crush me. I came home one evening to find Ethan sitting on the patio, the folded notice of active intent on the table in front of him. He was staring at the sunset, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "He knows," Ethan said. My heart stopped. "What?" "He knows about the meeting with Elena." Ethan said, "He called me an hour ago. He didn't mention her name. He just said, 'I hear you are asking questions about your mother's estate. Ethan, be very careful. Curiosity killed the cat.'" He took a sip of whiskey. "He has spies everywhere. Naomi, even at the fiduciary's office. Or maybe he tracks my phone. I don't know." I sat down next to him. "He's trying to scare you." I said, "It is working," Ethan said. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. "Naomi, I can't do this. I can't be the one to stick the knife in. He is my father. He is not a father. Ethan," I said fiercely, "he is a boss, and a bad one." Ethan shook his head. "I can't sign it. I am sorry." He left the paper on the table and walked inside. I sat there as the sun went down, looking at the document that could change everything. I had the strategy. I had the coalition forming. I had the leverage. But I didn't have the husband. If I pushed him too hard, if I forced him to sign, I would break him. I would become just another person trying to control Ethan Hawthorne. I would be no better than Victor. But if we did nothing, Victor would win. He would buy the logistics company, lock in the debt, and own us forever. I picked up the paper. I realized then that the hardest part of this chess match wasn't outsmarting Victor. It was waiting for Ethan to realize he was already in checkmate. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. I wouldn't force him, but I would make sure that when he was ready, the weapon was loaded, polished, and pointing in the right direction. The wire transfer hit my business account at 9 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday, $94,000. It was my performance bonus for the Ohio Turnaround Project. I sat in my home office, the guest room with the locked door, and stared at the number on the screen. It was not Hawthorne money. It did not come from a trust fund, a dividend, or a hush money settlement. It came from sweat, spreadsheets, and 4 months of arguing with union reps in a break room that smelled of stale popcorn. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. For the first time since marrying Ethan, I felt the ground solidify beneath my feet. I was not just Naomi the interloper, or Naomi the problem. I was Naomi Patterson, a woman who could fix broken things and get paid for it. An hour later, my phone rang. It was a journalist from a national business magazine, Ms. Patterson. He said, "I heard about the work you did with the auto supplier in Canton. My sources say you cut their logistics overhead by 18%. That is a hell of a number. I would love to profile you. We are doing a piece on boutique consulting firms disrupting the legacy players." My ego wanted to say yes. I wanted my name in print. I wanted to tape the article to Victor's refrigerator. But I was playing a longer game. "I appreciate the interest," I said, keeping my voice professional. "But I am not taking press inquiries at this time. My work speaks for itself." I hung up. Publicity was oxygen to Victor. But right now, I needed to be carbon monoxide, odorless, invisible, and filling the room while he slept. If I made headlines, he would see me as a competitor. If I stayed quiet, he might still mistake me for a nuisance. I was wrong. He did not mistake me for a nuisance. He mistook me for an asset to be liquidated. 3 days later, a courier arrived at the house while Ethan was at work. He handed me a thick envelope with the return address of a law firm I did not recognize. It was not the family council. It was a firm known for high-stakes divorce litigation. I opened it at the kitchen island. It was not a lawsuit. It was a settlement offer. The document was titled Confidential Separation and Release Agreement. It was drafted for me and Ethan. It outlined a no-fault separation based on irreconcilable differences regarding lifestyle compatibility. I flipped to the compensation page. Victor, or rather, the entity funding the settlement, was offering me a lump sum of $5 million. Additionally, the agreement included the deed to a luxury condominium in the Battery Park district of Manhattan, fully paid, along with a monthly stipend for 2 years. In exchange, I had to sign a full non-disclosure agreement, waive all claims to the Hawthorne estate, and vacate my current residence within 30 days. There was a sticky note attached to the last page. It was written in Victor's looping, arrogant handwriting. "Naomi, this is a clean break. You get your independence. Ethan gets his peace. Do the math. It is a good deal. V." I felt a cold nausea spread through my stomach. He wasn't just asking us to divorce. He was trying to buy me off like a bad investment. He had calculated my price, or what he thought was my price, and cut a check. He didn't care about Ethan's happiness. He cared about removing a contaminant from the bloodline. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. $5 million. I could take it. I could sign the paper, move to the city, and never have to look at Victor's sneering face again. I could be free. But then I looked at the sticky note again. Ethan gets his peace. Peace? No. If I left, Ethan would be alone in the shark tank. He would be swallowed whole. Victor would marry him off to some docile socialite from a good family who knew how to keep her mouth shut, and Ethan would shrink until he disappeared completely. I waited for Ethan to come home. He walked in at 7, looking gray and exhausted. The acquisition deal was grinding him down. He saw the papers on the island and froze. "What is that?" he asked. I slid the document toward him. "Your father made me an offer." I said. Ethan read it. I watched his face. I expected anger. I expected him to be insulted that his father was trying to bribe his wife to leave him. Instead, his shoulders slumped. He looked at the number. $5 million, he whispered. He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a terrible, desperate hope. "Naomi," he said softly, "maybe we should take it." The air left the room. "What?" I asked. "Think about it," he said, his voice rising in speed. "We could take the money. We could leave. We could start over. You want independence? This is it. We could move to Europe. We could get away from him. He thinks he is buying a divorce." "Ethan," I said, my voice shaking, "he isn't paying us to run away together. He is paying me to leave you. Read the clause. It requires a dissolution of the marriage." Ethan looked back at the paper. "We could fake it," he stammered. "We could divorce legally and still be together. We could beat him at his own game." I looked at my husband. I saw the fear that had hollowed him out. He was so terrified of his father that he was willing to sell our marriage for a safety net. I am not taking the money. Ethan, I said firmly. Why not? He cried. He threw his hands up. Why do you have to be so stubborn? It is $5 million. It is freedom. It is not freedom. I said, it is a leash. If I take this money, I am admitting that I am something that can be bought. I am admitting that I am exactly what he called me. Trash that he can pay to haul away. I slammed my hand on the counter. I am not for sale. Ethan, and neither are you. Ethan flinched. He backed away. Leaning against the refrigerator, he looked small. You don't understand. He whispered, you can't win against him. Naomi, he destroys people. If we stay, he will grind us down until there is nothing left. I am just trying to survive. Then survive on your feet. I said, not on your knees. I took the settlement agreement and walked to the sink. I turned on the garbage disposal. I fed the pages in, one by one. The machine roared, chewing up the legal boilerplate, the $5 million, and the condo in Manhattan. Ethan watched me, his face pale. You just declared war. He said, no, I said, turning off the disposal. I just declined a transaction. The retaliation came 48 hours later. It arrived as a cease and desist letter from the Hawthorne Global General Counsel. It claimed that I was in violation of family confidentiality protocols by sharing sensitive financial information with unauthorized third parties. Specifically, the independent fiduciary advisor we had met. The letter was heavy with legal threats. It cited potential damages. It demanded that I surrender all notes, recordings, and documents related to the family trust immediately. It was a bluff. I knew it was a bluff. Discussing my husband's assets with a certified financial advisor was not a crime. It was due diligence. But Victor relied on the fact that legal letters scared people. He wanted to scare me into silence. He wanted me to think he had cameras in my eyes. I did not panic. I did not cry. I called a lawyer, not a family friend, not someone from the club. I hired a sharp, aggressive litigator named Sarah Jenkins who specialized in corporate harassment. We drafted a response. It was not emotional. It was surgical. Dear Mr. Hawthorne, my client, Naomi Patterson, is in receipt of your correspondence dated November 3rd. Please be advised that Mrs. Patterson has not violated any binding confidentiality agreement, as no such agreement exists regarding her private consultation with licensed financial professionals. Furthermore, your attempt to restrict her access to standard financial counsel regarding marital assets constitutes coercive control. We have documented this correspondence, along with the settlement offer received on November 1st, as evidence of a pattern of harassment. Any further attempts to intimidate my client will be met with immediate legal action in the public court system. Sincerely, Sarah Jenkins. We sent it via certified mail. I was shaking when I signed it. I was terrified. But Gideon Hale's voice was in my head. He fears sunlight. By threatening to take it to a public court system, I was threatening to open the curtains. Victor went silent. The legal letters stopped, but the silence was worse. It was the silence of a predator repositioning. I needed to know what he was doing. I met Marianne Voss again. This time, she did not bring a folder. She brought a USB drive. I shouldn't have this, she said, her hands trembling as she slid it across the diner table. I made a copy of his calendar before I left. I synced it to my personal cloud. I know it is a risk, but you need to see this. I plugged it into my laptop right there in the booth. It was a calendar invite for a meeting scheduled for the following Thursday. The attendees included Victor, the CFO Leonard Price, and 3 representatives from a private equity firm known for distressed debt. The subject line was Subsidiary Allocation/Liability Transfer. I opened the attached memo. It was dense, filled with acronyms, but my operations brain decoded it quickly. Victor was planning to take the toxic debt from the acquisition, the high-risk loans that could trigger the bank covenants, and move them into a newly formed subsidiary. He was going to isolate the risk in a shell company that held the pension obligations for the warehouse workers if the acquisition failed. The subsidiary would go bankrupt. Hawthorne Global would remain pristine, but the subsidiary would collapse. The pension fund would be wiped out. 3,000 families, people who drove forklifts and packed boxes, they would lose their retirement so Victor could buy a competitor and look like a king. I felt a wave of cold rage. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about the dinner or the insult. This was systemic predation. I looked at Marianne. "Does the board know?" I asked. Marianne shook her head. "He will present it to them as a standard restructuring. He will bury the risk in the footnotes. They will sign it because they always sign it." I closed the laptop. "I could leak this," I said. "I could send this to the union. I could send it to the press." "If you do that," Marianne said, "the banks will pull the funding immediately. The stock will crash. The company might go under. Thousands of people could lose their jobs today, not just their pensions tomorrow." She was right. Burning the company down to stop Victor was not a victory. It was collateral damage. I had to stop him from the inside. I had to stop him before he signed the transfer. I need a coalition. I said, "Gideon was right. I need votes." I started reaching out to the independent directors I had identified. I didn't show them the stolen memo. That was illegal. But I asked the questions the memo raised. I called the head of the audit committee. "I am hearing rumors," I said, keeping my voice casual, "about a liability transfer involving the pension fund. Given the current regulatory climate, are we sure that has been fully stress-tested?" I planted the anxiety. I made them look. But I needed more than anxiety. I needed a heavy hitter. I called Sloan Mercer. We met in a park, walking quickly in the cold November wind. Sloan wore a trench coat and sunglasses. "I need you to introduce me to the institutional investors." I said, "The big ones, the ones who hold 10% of the stock." Sloan stopped walking. She looked at me. "You are going for a proxy fight," she said. "I am going for a governance review." I said, "I want to force a vote on the debt structure." Sloan stared at the gray water of the pond. "Do you know why I hate him?" she asked suddenly. I shook my head. "I was engaged to his nephew." She said, "Patrick, I know the head of the teachers' pension fund in California. They hold 5%. If you can show them that Victor is risking the dividend, they will listen. We had the strategy, but we needed a trigger. We needed a legal mechanism to force the board to pay attention." I went back to the legacy share, the document Ethan had refused to sign. I couldn't force Ethan to sign the notice of active intent to convert the shares to voting stock. He wasn't ready, but I read the fine print of the trust deed again. There was another clause. Clause 8.1, Informational Rights. The beneficiary of the Class B shares has the right to demand full inspection of all corporate books and records for any proper purpose related to the valuation of said shares. Ethan didn't need to vote to use this. He just needed to ask for information. It was a lower bar. It was less aggressive. I sat Ethan down that night. "I am not asking you to fight him," I said. "I am just asking you to protect the value of your mother's gift. If Victor moves that debt, your shares, the ones she left you, become worthless." Ethan looked at the floor. "He will know it is you," he said. "Let him know." I said, "But you have to sign the request. It is just a request for information." "Ethan, it is a letter. It is not a gun." Ethan took the pen. His hand shook, but he signed it. We filed the Section 220 demand for inspection the next morning. It was a boring, bureaucratic legal filing, but to Victor, it was a declaration of war. It meant we were legally entitled to see the emails, the memos, and the valuation models for the acquisition. If he denied us, he was breaking corporate law. If he showed us, we would see the fraud. He was trapped. Victor didn't scream. He didn't sue. He went social. 2 days later, I walked into my favorite coffee shop. The barista, who usually chatted with me, looked away. People at the tables whispered. I opened the local society paper on my phone. There was an article in the gossip column. The trouble with turnarounds. It didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. It described a certain striving consultant who had married into a prominent local family and was now aggressively maneuvering to manipulate her husband's inheritance. It quoted anonymous sources calling me a social climber and a gold digger who was isolating her husband from his devoted father. It was a smear. It was designed to humiliate me, to strip away my social capital, to make me a pariah. I went to a charity luncheon I had committed to months ago. I had to hold my head high. When I walked in, the room went quiet. Women I had known for a year turned their backs. I saw the looks of pity and disgust. Victor had poisoned the water. I sat at my assigned table, alone. The other seats remained empty. I felt the tears pricking my eyes. I was tough, but I was human. The isolation was suffocating. Then, a shadow fell over my table. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up. Standing there was a woman in a Chanel suit, holding a cane. She had silver hair and a face that looked like a softer, sadder version of Victor's. It was Elaine Hawthorne, Victor's estranged sister. I had never met her. She had been exiled from the family circle years ago. Legend said she was difficult, Ms. Hawthorne. I stammered. Elaine sat down. She placed her napkin on her lap with deliberate grace. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the women who were shunning me. They looked away, embarrassed. Elaine Hawthorne still carried weight. I read the column. Elaine said. Her voice was like crushed gravel and velvet. "Classic Victor. I didn't do it." I said, "I am not what they say." "I know," she said. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her skin was cool and dry. "He did it to me first," she said, 30 years ago. When I tried to ask why our father's estate was being managed by his college roommate, he told everyone I was hysterical. He told everyone I was having a breakdown. He took my board seat and gave me a stipend to go away. She squeezed my hand. "You are not crazy, Naomi, and you are not alone. You are just the first one who actually read the bylaws." I felt a lump in my throat. "Why are you sitting with me?" I asked. "Because I hear you are building a coalition," she said quietly, "and I still own 3% of the voting stock. It is in a trust he can't touch." She smiled. "A small, wicked thing. I want to be in the room when you fire him." I walked out of that luncheon with Elaine Hawthorne on my arm. The whispers changed tone. I wasn't just the climber anymore. I was the opposition party. I had the coalition. I had Sloan. I had Elaine. I had the pension funds listening. And I had the Section 220 demand forcing the books open. But I also had a ticking clock. Marianne texted me that night. Closing date moved up. He is trying to sign the acquisition this Friday. The debt transfer happened simultaneously. It was Wednesday. We had 48 hours. If Victor signed that deal on Friday, the toxic debt would be locked into the subsidiary. The employees would be doomed, and once the ink was dry, no amount of governance review could undo it. I looked at my war room wall. The map was full. The pieces were in place. I couldn't wait for the slow legal process of the information request. I had to move now. I picked up the phone and called Sarah Jenkins. "Prepare the injunction." I said, "We are going to court." I stared at the drafted injunction on my lawyer's desk. It was a beautiful piece of legal violence, designed to freeze the acquisition of Kimball Logistics and expose the debt transfer scheme to the world. It would stop Victor. It would save the pension fund, but it would also kill the company. If I filed this document, the banks would panic, the stock would plummet, the credit lines would dry up, and Hawthorne Global would enter a death spiral. I would be the woman who burned down a 100-year-old institution just to spite her father-in-law. I looked at Sarah Jenkins. "Don't file it," I said. Sarah blinked, her hand hovering over the courier packet. "Naomi," she said slowly, "you said the closing is Friday. If we don't file this today, he signs the deal. The debt moves. The risk is locked in." "I know," I said. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray city skyline. "If I stop him now, I am the enemy of the shareholders." I said, "I am the obstructionist. But if I let him sign, if you let him sign." Sarah said, "He wins." "No," I said, "if I let him sign, he commits. He puts his name on the line. He validates the debt structure. He owns the risk. I turned back to her. We wait. I said, we let him close the deal. We let the market pop. We let him take his victory lap. And then, when he is standing in the center of the spotlight, holding the trophy, we turn on the lights. Sarah smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. You want to trap him inside his own success, she said. I want to fire him for cause. I said, and the cause is recklessness. But I can't prove he is reckless until he crashes the car. I left the office. I had 48 hours to turn a defensive line into an offensive coup. I needed shares. I needed more than the coalition of small pension funds. I needed a block. I met Sloan Mercer at her office. She had the Bloomberg terminal glowing green in front of her. The rumors are working, Sloan said without looking up. There is a mid-sized institutional fund in Boston, Greenwich Capital. They hold 2% of Hawthorne Global. They are nervous. They heard about the debt covenant issues and they want to de-risk before the quarterly report. Get them on the phone. I said, they won't talk to you. Naomi, Sloan said, you are a consultant with a small LLC. You don't have the capital to buy a 2% block. That is $80 million. I don't need to buy it alone, I said. Structure it. Create a special purpose vehicle. My LLC puts in the first tranche. You bring in your quiet investors for the rest. We buy the block off-market. A private transaction. Sloan turned her chair around. You are leveraging everything, she said. If this goes wrong, if the stock tanks after you fire him, you are bankrupt. If I don't fire him, I am morally bankrupt. I said. Sloan picked up the phone. I will call Greenwich, she said. By Thursday afternoon, the deal was done. Patterson Operations, LLC, in partnership with a generic-sounding entity called Argus Partners, acquired 2 million shares of Hawthorne Global. It was a silent trade, executed in the dark pools of the market. Victor wouldn't see it until the ownership registry updated the following week. I now controlled, through alliances and direct ownership, nearly 7% of the voting stock, combined with Elaine's 3% and the sway of the pension funds. We were approaching a tipping point, but I needed the final piece. I needed the moral authority. I went home to Ethan. He was in the living room, packing a suitcase. Where are you going? I asked, my heart hammering. He looked up. His eyes were red, but his face was calm. I am not leaving you, he said. I am going to a hotel near the office. I need to be alone for a night. I have a session with Dr. Thorne in the morning. He zipped the bag. I can't be in this house while you are plotting against him. Naomi, it is too loud in my head. Ethan, I said softly, I am not asking you to plot. I am asking you to tell the truth. He looked at me for a long moment. The truth is that I am afraid of him, he said. That is the only truth I have ever known. He walked to the door. I will see you at the board meeting on Monday, he said. He left. I spent the weekend in a state of suspended animation. On Friday, the news broke. Hawthorne Global had acquired Kimball Logistics. The press release was jubilant. Victor was quoted calling it a transformational era for the family legacy. The stock jumped 6%. Victor was a hero. The market loved him. I received a text from him on Saturday evening. Naomi, the dust has settled. We have had our differences, but this is a time for family unity. Come to dinner tomorrow night. Just us. Let us find a path forward. V? It was the invitation to the spider's web. I knew what it was. He wanted to offer me a new deal, or he wanted to threaten me now that he felt invincible. I accepted. I dressed carefully. I wore a navy blue dress, high-necked, professional. I wore no jewelry except my wedding band. The estate was quiet when I arrived. The staff was gone. Victor was waiting in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth. He poured 2 glasses of vintage burgundy. Naomi, he said, his voice rich and warm. You look tired. This crusade of yours must be exhausting. I am not tired. Victor, I said, taking the seat opposite him. I am focused. He sat down, swirling his wine. I admire your spirit, he said. I really do. You remind me of myself when I was young, hungry, relentless. But you are making a category error. And what is that? I asked. You think you are fighting a battle of laws, he said. You think if you find the right clause, the right footnote, you can win. But this is not a battle of laws. It is a battle of will, and my will is stronger than yours. He leaned forward. The firelight cast long shadows across his face. I know about your little coalition, he said. I know you have been talking to the pension funds. I know you have been poisoning the well. I haven't poisoned anything. I said, I have asked questions. If the answers are poisonous, that is on you. He laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. I can crush you. Naomi, I can tie you up in litigation for 20 years. I can make sure you never work in this town again. I can destroy Ethan's life just to spite you. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Or, he said, softening his tone, we can end this. I have a new offer, 10 million, and a seat on the board of the foundation. You can play philanthropist. You can be the benevolent face of the family. You can have power. Naomi, real power. All you have to do is stop asking questions about the debt. I looked at the table. His phone was lying face down between us. I noticed the slight angle of it. The microphone end was pointed toward me. He was recording. He wanted me to agree to the money. He wanted me to say, fine, give me the 10 million and I will stop. Then he would have me on tape soliciting a bribe to cease a corporate investigation. He would blackmail me with it forever. I sat back. I kept my face smooth. I am not here to negotiate a settlement. Victor, I said clearly, I am here to discuss the governance of Hawthorne Global. As a shareholder, I am concerned about the leverage ratio post-acquisition. I am concerned about the internal controls regarding subsidiary debt transfer. These are fiduciary concerns. They cannot be solved by a donation to my personal bank account. Victor's eyes flickered. He knew I had spotted the trap. You are very boring. Naomi, he spat. I stood up. I will see you at the quarterly board meeting tomorrow. Victor, I walked out. I didn't run. I walked at a measured pace. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove through the gates. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. But I hadn't given him a single inch of tape. Monday morning, the boardroom on the 42nd floor. The room smelled of lemon polish and fear. The 12 directors took their seats. They were men and women of industry, wealthy, accomplished, and utterly cowed by Victor Hawthorne. Victor sat at the head of the table. He looked energized, triumphant. Good morning, everyone, he boomed. We have a packed agenda today. The Kimball integration, the Q4 forecast. Excuse me. Mr. Chairman? The voice came from the far end of the table. It was Gideon Hale. He had used his standing as a chairman emeritus to attend the meeting as a non-voting observer, but I had given him my proxy for the opening statement. Victor frowned. Gideon, I didn't expect to see you. We are in session. There is a revised agenda. Gideon said. He slid a stack of papers down the mahogany table. They fanned out like a deck of cards. Victor picked up the sheet. Agenda Item 1. Review of Executive Leadership. Agenda Item 2. Governance Audit regarding debt obligations. Agenda Item 3. Motion to remove the CEO for cause. Victor laughed. He actually laughed. What is this? He asked, looking around the room. Is this a joke? It is not a joke, I said. I was standing at the back of the room. I was not a director, but as a significant shareholder with a pending motion. I had the right to be present. Victor sneered. You have no standing here. Naomi, security. I have standing, a voice said. Ethan stood up. He looked pale. He looked like he might vomit, but he was standing. I am a voting shareholder, Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly before finding its rhythm. I hold 4% of the voting stock via the Catherine Hawthorne Legacy Fund. I have filed the active intent notice. It was recorded this morning. Victor froze. He looked at his son. You ungrateful little... I move to adopt the revised agenda, Ethan said. I second, said the representative from the Teachers' Pension Fund. Victor looked around the table. He saw the faces of the directors. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at their papers. They were calculating. "Fine," Victor hissed. "Let us entertain this charade. You want to review my leadership? I just delivered the biggest acquisition in our history. I just made you all 20% richer in a single week. What is the charge? Success? The charge is fraud." I said. I walked to the table. I placed a single document in the center. It was the memo Marianne had given me, the one outlining the transfer of toxic debt to the pension subsidiary. "You are planning to move $3 billion of high-risk obligations into the employee pension fund vehicle." I said, "You are doing this to evade the bank covenants triggered by the acquisition. It is a technical breach of contract, and it is a violation of your fiduciary duty to the beneficiaries of that fund." Victor waved a hand. "That is a draft proposal," he shouted. "A theoretical model. It was never executed. We explore all options. That is what management does. You have no proof that this is active policy." "We do have proof." A quiet voice said. Leonard Price, the CFO, stood up. Leonard was sweating. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead. He didn't look at Victor. He looked at the board members. "I have submitted a sealed memorandum to the audit committee this morning," Leonard said. His voice was flat, mechanical. "It details the pressure campaign to approve the transfer. It includes the emails where I was instructed to alter the risk assessments. It confirms that the transfer was scheduled for execution this afternoon." Victor turned purple. "You traitor," he whispered. "You spineless coward. I made you. I can break you. I cannot go to prison for you." "Victor," Leonard said softly, "I have a family." Leonard sat down. The room was silent. The air was sucked out of the space. Victor stood up. He loomed over the table. His fists clenched on the wood. "This is a conspiracy," he snarled. "A palace coup orchestrated by a disgruntled daughter-in-law and a weak son. You think you can run this company without me? I am Hawthorne Global. There is no company without me." He pointed a finger at the head of the audit committee. "A woman named Margaret. If you vote for this, Margaret, I will pull my funding from your husband's research lab. I will ruin him." He pointed at another director. "And you, David, I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. You think I don't keep files? I will burn you all down." It was the fatal mistake. He had threatened them, explicitly, on the record. The court reporter was typing furiously in the corner. Gideon Hale looked up. "Thank you, Victor," Gideon said calmly. "You have just confirmed the necessity of this motion." Gideon looked at the corporate secretary. "Call the roll," he said. Victor stared at them. He looked wild, cornered, and dangerous. "You can't do this," he said. The secretary began to call the names. "Mr. Hawthorne. Ethan? Yes. Miss Hawthorne. Elaine, by proxy? Yes. Pension fund representative? Yes. Greenwich Capital representative? Yes." It went around the table. The independent directors, terrified by Victor's threats and emboldened by Leonard's confession, fell in line. They voted for safety. They voted for the winning side. The motion carries. The secretary said, "Victor Hawthorne is removed as CEO and chairman, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation." Victor stood there. He looked at Ethan. "You are dead to me," he said. Ethan didn't look away. He looked sad, but he didn't look down. "I know," Ethan said. Victor looked at me. His eyes were black holes of hate. "You think you won," he whispered. "You have no idea what you have done." "Mr. Hawthorne," the head of security said. Stepping forward, he was a large man who had worked for Victor for 10 years. He looked uncomfortable, but resolute. "Sir, I have to ask you to surrender your badge and your devices." Victor looked at the guard. He straightened his jacket. He smoothed his tie. He summoned every ounce of his aristocratic arrogance. "Do not touch me," he said. He walked to the door. He didn't look back. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind him. The room exhaled. It was a collective release of breath that had been held for decades. "Naomi," Gideon said. "We need an interim statement for the press. The stock is going to wobble. We need to project stability." I nodded. I went into operations mode. I started assigning tasks. I helped draft the press release. I spoke to the lawyers about the preservation of evidence. I was efficient, calm, and professional. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy. I felt the weight of the wreckage we had just created to save the ship. Ethan sat in his chair, staring at the empty spot at the head of the table. "Are you okay?" I asked him, touching his shoulder. He nodded slowly. "It is done," he said. "The monster is gone." We left the building an hour later. The paparazzi were already gathering outside, sensing blood in the water. We took the service exit. I sat in the back of the car, watching the city roll by. I had done it. I had taken on a billionaire on his own turf, and I had won. I had protected the employees. I had saved my husband. I had secured my dignity. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. It was a text message from Elaine Hawthorne. "Congratulations, Naomi. You killed the king. But remember what I told you. He never fights fair." A second message bubbled up. "He has something on your husband. I just remembered what it is. It wasn't just money. It was something from years ago. A settlement. He kept the file in his personal safe at the house. He kept it like a leash." I looked at Ethan. He was looking out the window, looking lighter than I had ever seen him. "What is it?" he asked. Sensing my tension, I looked at the phone. A settlement. A cold dread settled in my stomach. The war wasn't over. Victor had been disarmed, but he had left a landmine behind. "Nothing," I said, lying to my husband for the first time in months. "Just a congratulations text." I turned off the phone. The car drove into the tunnel, plunging us into darkness before we emerged, hopefully, into the light. The office of the CEO was silent. It was a silence that felt heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a submarine dive. For 30 years, this room had been the nerve center of Victor Hawthorne's ego. It smelled of cigar smoke, leather, and intimidation. Now, it just smelled of cleaning fluid. I stood by the window, looking out at the city. It had been 48 hours since the board vote. The locks had been changed. The security codes had been wiped. Victor was gone. Physically, at least. But a man like Victor Hawthorne does not vanish just because he loses a vote. He lingers in the machinery. Ethan was sitting on the leather sofa, his head in his hands. He had not slept in 2 days. He looked like a man who had survived a car crash, but was just now feeling the internal bleeding. "We have to open the safe," I said. Ethan looked up. His eyes were hollow. "Security already cleared it," he said. "They took the corporate files, not the corporate safe," I said. "The personal one. The one behind the painting of the shipyard. Elaine told me about it. She said that is where he keeps the insurance." Ethan stood up unsteadily. He walked to the painting, a gloomy oil depiction of a storm at sea, and pulled the frame. It swung forward on a hidden hinge. Behind it was a steel panel with a biometric scanner and a keypad. "I don't have the code," Ethan said. "I do," I said. I pulled a slip of paper from my pocket. Elaine had sent it to me via an encrypted message app an hour ago. She had guessed it. She said Victor was a creature of habit, and his habit was vanity. I typed in the numbers. 1985. The year he took the company public. The light turned green. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. It was mostly empty. There were stacks of cash, emergency money for a getaway that never happened. There were passports, and there was a single, thick envelope made of blue legal paper. The label on the front was handwritten in Victor's sharp, jagged script, "The Catherine Problem." Ethan froze. He stared at the name of his dead mother. "Open it," he whispered. I pulled the envelope out. I sat down at Victor's desk, a desk I had no right to sit at. Yet here I was, and opened the clasp. I pulled out the documents. I read the first page, then the second. My stomach turned over. It was not a crime Ethan had committed. It was not a sordid affair or a drug problem. It was something far colder. "What is it?" Ethan asked. His voice was brittle. I looked at my husband. I had to tell him the truth, and I knew the truth would break him. "Ethan," I said softly, "your mother didn't die of a heart defect." Ethan blinked. "Yes, she did," he said automatically. "It was congenital. She collapsed at the hospital. They tried to save her. Dad told me." He held my hand at the funeral and told me her heart was just too big for this world. I slid the document across the desk. She died of a medication error. I said, "An overdose of anticoagulants administered by a resident physician after a routine surgery. It was malpractice. Ethan, gross negligence." Ethan picked up the paper. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled against the wood. "I don't understand," he said. "Victor knew," I said, pointing to the settlement agreement. "The hospital knew. They were terrified of a lawsuit. They offered a settlement." I turned the page to the signature line. Victor Hawthorne had signed it. "He took $2 million, I said, "in exchange for a complete release of liability and a strict non-disclosure agreement. He agreed to seal the records. He agreed to never speak of the error. He sold her death, Ethan. He took the cash, and in exchange, he agreed to let the world believe she just had a weak heart." Ethan stared at the signature. "He told me I killed her." Ethan whispered. I froze. "What?" "He told me." Ethan's voice cracked, fracturing into a sob. "He told me she was stressed because I was a difficult child. He told me her heart gave out because she worried about me too much. He said I had to be good, I had to be perfect, to make up for the stress that took her away. I felt a rage so pure and white-hot it almost blinded me. Victor hadn't just covered up the truth for money. He had weaponized the lie. He had used a medical mistake to build a cage of guilt around his own son. He had turned Ethan into a prisoner of his own existence, convincing him that his very nature was lethal to the people he loved. That was the leash. That was how he kept Ethan obedient for 20 years. Be good, or you will hurt someone else. Ethan made a sound, a low, guttural wail of pain that seemed to come from his marrow. He crumpled to the floor, clutching the blue paper to his chest. I went to him. I held him. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. I just sat with him on the expensive rug while he wept for the mother he lost and the father he never really had. The next 3 days were a blur of crisis management. Ethan checked into a private hotel suite. He refused to go home. He refused to speak to anyone but Dr. Thorne. He was spiraling, swinging between catatonic grief and explosive rage. I went to see him every evening. I brought food he didn't eat. I should kill him, Ethan said on the second night, staring at the wall. I should go to the estate and burn it down with him inside. That is what he wants, I said calmly, pouring him a glass of water. He wants you to be crazy. He wants you to be violent, because if you are violent, he can say he was right to control you. I can't breathe. "Naomi," he said, "my whole life, every choice I made, was to apologize for a murder I didn't commit. I know." I said. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Tell me what to do. Naomi, you always know what to do. Fix me." I sat down opposite him. This was the dangerous moment. I could step in. I could become the new architect of his life. I could tell him what to eat, where to live, how to heal. I could replace Victor's iron cage with a softer, velvet one. But that wasn't love. That was just new management. "No," I said. He flinched. "No, I am not your mother, Ethan, and I am not your father. I am your wife. I will support you. I will hold your hand. I will fight for you. But I cannot fix you. You have to choose to heal. You have to do the work. I don't know how," he whispered. "You start by being honest," I said. "You start by feeling the anger without letting it drive the car." I left him there. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But I knew that if I carried him now, he would never learn to walk. While Ethan fought his ghosts, I fought the living. The board called me in. Gideon Hale sat at the head of the table, looking grim. "We have a problem," Gideon said. "The stock is down 12%. The market hates uncertainty. They don't know who is running the ship." I looked around the table. "Leonard is the acting CEO. I said, "Leonard is a witness. Sloane Mercer said from the corner. He is compromised. We need a face. Someone the market sees as the architect of the correction. They were looking at me. No, I said immediately. I am a consultant. I am not a CEO. You are the one who found the fraud. Gideon said. You are the one the employees trust right now because you saved their pensions. We need you to take the interim chairwoman seat, just for 90 days, just until we find a permanent replacement. I hesitated. I didn't want power. I wanted my life back. I wanted to go back to fixing supply chains in Ohio, but I thought about the 3,000 warehouse workers. I thought about the pension fund. If the company collapsed now, Victor's narrative would win. He would say, "See? They fired me and destroyed the legacy. I will take the seat." I said, "But only as a non-executive chair. My job is governance. My job is to clean the house, not to decorate it." "Agreed," Gideon said. I didn't get to celebrate. 2 hours later, the counterattack launched. It started on a financial news network, an exclusive report citing sources close to the former chairman. The headline flashed on the screen in the lobby. The consultant coup. Did Naomi Patterson insider trade her way to the top? Victor was leaking, and he was leaking lies mixed with just enough truth to be damaging. The report claimed I had used my husband's confidential information to trade against the company. It claimed I had orchestrated a hostile takeover using shadow capital from unknown sources. It painted me as Lady Macbeth with a Bloomberg terminal. My phone exploded. Reporters were camped on my lawn. The stock dipped another 4%. Sarah Jenkins, my lawyer, was pacing in my office. "We need to sue for libel," she said. "We need to shut this down." "No," I said. I was looking at the screen, watching a pundit describe me as a ruthless operator, if we sue. "We look defensive," I said. "We look like we are hiding something. Victor wants a muddy fight. He wants us to wrestle him in the dirt." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked. "We turn on the lights," I said. I called the head of compliance. "I want an independent audit," I said. "Hired by the board, not by me. Forensic review of every trade I made, every email I sent, and every share I purchased. That will take weeks." The compliance officer said, "Start it today," I said, and released the engagement letter to the press. Then I sat down and wrote a timeline. I documented every meeting, every discovery, every interaction with Victor. I attached the date-stamped emails. I redacted the sensitive corporate data. But I left the narrative intact. I titled it, "The Path to Accountability." I posted it to the company website. I didn't spin it. I didn't use adjectives. I just laid out the facts of the debt transfer, the pension risk, and the governance failures. I ended it with a simple statement. I did not buy this company to own it. I bought a stake to save it from illegal practices. My trades are open for review. My conscience is clear. It was a gamble. Radical transparency usually terrified lawyers, but it worked. The story shifted. The financial press stopped talking about the coup and started talking about the pension rescue. The timeline was too detailed, too boring, and too factual to be a lie. Victor's narrative crumbled because it relied on mystery. I had removed the mystery. But I wasn't done with Victor. I needed to close the loop. I drove to the estate on a rainy Tuesday. I didn't call ahead. The security guard at the gate recognized me. He looked nervous. "Mr. Hawthorne gave orders not to admit you." He said, "Mr. Hawthorne doesn't sign your paycheck anymore." I said, "The company does, and I am the chairwoman of the board. Open the gate." He opened the gate. I found Victor in the garden. He was pruning roses. He looked smaller than I remembered. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, but he looked shrunken, like a balloon that had lost its air. He didn't look up when I approached. "I assume you are here to gloat," he said. He snipped a dead head off a yellow rose. "I am not here to gloat." "Victor," I said, "I am here to return something." I pulled the blue envelope from my bag, a copy of the settlement agreement. I placed it on the iron table next to his shears. He looked at it. His face didn't change, but his hand stilled. "You found the safe," he said. "Clever girl. You lied to him." I said, You let him think he was a murderer for 20 years. It was necessary, Victor said. He snipped another flower. Ethan was weak. He needed structure. He needed to understand that actions have consequences. I gave him a conscience. You gave him a complex. I said, you broke him so you could mold him. And look what happened, Victor said. Turning to face me, his eyes were cold. Hard chips of flint. I built an empire. I provided for him. I provided for you. You are standing in my garden, wearing clothes bought with my money, lecturing me on morality. He took a step closer. You will always be trash. Naomi, he hissed. You can buy the shares. You can steal the title, but you are a clerk, a middle management nobody who got lucky. You have no blood. You have no legacy. Money doesn't change who you are. I looked at him. I waited for the anger to come. I waited for the hurt, but it didn't come. I just felt a profound, exhausting pity. You are right, Victor, I said. He blinked, surprised. Money doesn't change who you are. I continued. You have billions of dollars. You have this estate. You have the name. And yet, you are a man who had to blackmail his own son to get a Father's Day card. I stepped closer to him. You taught me the most important lesson of my life. I said, you taught me that money without character is just noise. And right now, Victor, you are very, very loud. I turned to walk away. Get off my property, he screamed after me. His voice cracked, high and thin. I didn't look back. I walked toward the driveway. A car was pulling up. It was a vintage Mercedes. Elaine Hawthorne got out. She was leaning heavily on her cane. But she was smiling. Did you do it? She asked. I gave him the papers. I said, he knows we know. Good, she said. She reached into her purse. I have something for you, she said. Or rather, for Ethan. She handed me a letter. The envelope was yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was delicate, fading. For my son. When he is ready, I stole it, Elaine said, from his desk, the day after the funeral. I knew Victor would burn it. I have kept it in a safety deposit box for 20 years, waiting for a moment when Ethan was free enough to read it. I took the letter. It felt warm in my hand. Thank you. Elaine, I said, give it to him. She said, it is the antidote. I drove to the hotel. Ethan was sitting on the balcony, watching the rain. I sat down next to him. I handed him the letter. What is this? He asked. It is from her. I said. Elaine saved it. Ethan took the envelope. He opened it with trembling fingers. He read it silently. I watched his face. I watched the tension, the years of accumulated terror, slowly drain away. He let out a long, shuddering breath. What does it say? I asked softly. He handed it to me. My darling Ethan, if you are reading this, I am gone. I am sorry I had to leave you so soon. But I need you to know one thing. My sweet boy, you were the light of my life. You were never a burden. You were my joy. Do not let your father make you afraid. He lives in a small, dark room of his own making. You were born for the sky. Be free. Love. Mom. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a legal document. It was just permission. Permission to exist without guilt. Ethan closed his eyes. Tears ran down his face. But they weren't the frantic tears of the last few days. They were quiet, cleansing tears. He stole 20 years from me. Ethan whispered. Yes, I said. But he doesn't get tomorrow, Ethan said. He opened his eyes. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Can we come back from this? He asked. You and me? I looked at my husband. I saw the scars. I saw the damage. I also saw the man who had stood up in the boardroom and voted against his father. I don't know. I said honestly. He flinched, but he nodded. I appreciate the honesty. He said, I love you. Ethan, I said, but I can't go back to the way it was. I can't be the keeper of your secrets. I can't be your shield. I don't want a shield, he said. I want a partner. He reached out and took my hand. Don't promise me forever, he said. Just promise me you won't leave while I figure out who I am. I squeezed his hand. I can promise that. I said, but there are conditions. Name them. He said, therapy. I said, real therapy. 4 times a week, complete transparency about the finances, and we set a timeline. 6 months? In 6 months, we evaluate. If we are growing, we stay. If we are just surviving, we let go. 6 months, Ethan said. He sounded relieved. It was a deadline. He understood deadlines. Deal, he said. The final act happened a week later, the quarterly shareholder meeting. It was held in the grand auditorium of the Hawthorne Global Headquarters. The room was packed, 500 people, shareholders, employees, press. I walked onto the stage. I stood at the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Sloane in the front row, nodding. I saw Elaine, smiling. I saw Ethan, sitting in the wings, watching me. Good morning, I said. My voice echoed in the hall. I didn't give a soaring speech. I didn't quote poetry. I spoke in the language of operations. We are here to vote on Resolution 4. I said, the termination of the advisory contract for Victor Hawthorne and the permanent revocation of his executive privileges. I laid out the case. I listed the governance failures. I listed the risk to the pension fund. Then I called for the vote. It wasn't close. The motion carried with 98% of the vote. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was a roar. It was the sound of people who had been afraid for a long time realizing that the boogeyman was gone. I didn't smile. I felt the weight of it. We had cut off the head of the snake, but now we had to run the zoo. I raised my hand for silence. We have removed the past, I said. Now we must build the future. I announced the reforms, an independent whistleblower hotline, a ban on family members serving on the audit committee, a new charter that prioritized employee stability alongside shareholder value. We are not just a family business anymore, I said. We are a public trust, and we will act like it. I walked off the stage. Ethan met me in the wings. He looked steady. You were good, he said. I was adequate. I said, I am just holding the seat warm for the real CEO. Who is that? He asked. Someone we haven't met yet. I said, someone who doesn't have the last name Hawthorne. We walked out of the building together. The paparazzi were waiting. The cameras flashing like lightning. Questions were shouted. Ms. Patterson, how does it feel to win? Ms. Patterson, is it true you fired your father-in-law? I stopped at the curb. I turned to the cameras. It doesn't feel like winning, I said calmly. It feels like work. I got into the car. Ethan got in beside me. Where to? The driver asked. Home, I said, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where that was. Thank you so much for listening to my billionaire in-law called me trash at dinner, so I bought his company and fired him. I hope you enjoyed this journey of corporate intrigue and personal reclamation. It has been a pleasure to bring Naomi's story to life for you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the Revenge Stories channel for more tales of justice and drama. Share your thoughts on Naomi's final choice in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, keep your head high and your leverage hidden.